He was still called Shadow Beast because lower-ranked creatures like him couldn't get a real name. The only thing that set him apart from the other bears was his size. He was twice as big. Jin-Woo couldn't wait to give him a proper name. He grinned from ear to ear, clearly excited. Tank, Jin-Woo thought aloud, considering if it fit. Then he nodded to himself, satisfied with the choice. Yes, that's perfect. With Jin-Woo's approval, Tank's new name became official. Now, as a night-rank shadow beast, Tank stood tall on his hind legs and let out a mighty roar, celebrating his upgrade. When Tank stood up on 2 feet like this, he was as tall as a house. Jin-Woo couldn't help but feel proud. Finally, you've got a real name, Tank, he said with a grin. Tank lifted his head and let out a mighty roar, like he was celebrating his new name. The others cheered along, relieved they could take a breather before the next challenge. Jin-Woo called back his shadow soldiers to rest for now. As he looked around, one thing caught his eye: Iron. His shoulders slumped in disappointment. Among the older guard, Iron was the only one who hadn't moved up in rank. Once all the soldiers had faded into his shadow, Jin-Woo left the castle. Azul was waiting for him, her face filled with worry. Jin-Woo, sir, she said hesitantly. I told you, you don't have to call me sir, Jin-Woo replied firmly. Azul nodded but looked unsure. After a moment she tried again. Jin-Woo, sir. Jin-Woo shot her a stern look, and Azul paused, fidgeting with her hands. Finally she spoke up again. Do you know how many families have been destroyed now? They were on the 89th floor now, while Azul had come from the 80th. That meant 9. She looked more worried with each family he defeated. Archnoble clans guard the 90th floor and up, Chun-Woo said quickly. They're way stronger than regular high-rank nobles. So what? Why not try talking to them? If you negotiate peacefully like you did with us, maybe they'll. Jin-Woo interrupted her mid-sentence. Kesal glared at him, her eyes blazing with anger. If I were weaker than you, would you have even talked to me? As she snapped, clamping her mouth shut tight. A human daring to show up uninvited to a demon's castle, and then acting all bossy. That was bold. So bold, it could have gotten him killed on the spot. Jin-Woo just flashed a big grin, his smile stretching from ear to ear. It is what it is, he said casually. He knew how things worked. Humans and magical creatures are monsters, rarely mixed. The strong always ruled, and the weak got left behind. Jin-Woo believed in this rule of nature, and he wasn't about to change his ways now. Not when he was so desperate to level up and get what he needed. He glanced sideways at Isal, his expression confident but cautious. He noticed her silence and the look of disappointment on her face. Isn't less competition among noble families a good thing? He asked. She looked puzzled. Huh? She replied. You mentioned there's a lot of rivalry between them. He reminded her. She hesitated before answering. But starting from the floor above, things were different. The archnoble families held all the power. If Jin-Woo failed, Azul and her clan would have to face their anger. Was you worried most about that? Jin-Woo turned to her with a confident smile. I'll make the Radar clan the best family there is. Our family's name is actually Radar. Imseal thought quietly. She didn't say anything though. Soon they'd be heading to a higher floor. Could this man really defeat all the powerful noble families by himself? Imseal shrugged to herself. Oh well. Her job was just to show him the way. Imseal had been overcomplicating stuff for too long. She finally decided to cut it simple. But then she remembered one last thing she wanted to ask him. Jin-Woo, sir, she said softly. Jin-Woo turned sharply, his eyebrow raised in surprise. What's up? Heseo gulped hard. After what she'd just seen, how easily he could level a place like this one, she was terrified to meet his eyes. So instead she stared at his boots. But why did you let us off the hook? She asked quietly. The Radar clan wasn't exactly in a position to fight back. They were no match for Jin-Woo's power. Sol was totally sure about this because she knew how strong her family was and she'd seen what Jin-Woo could do. But even though he was super ruthless, he'd let them go. Why? She just had to figure it out. Jin-Woo stepped onto the glowing portal thingy and turned to look at Sol. Because I like you, he said casually. Even though she was a monster, she knew when to give up or make a deal. Most importantly, she had given him a ton of information. Ezel's eyes widened in shock. Her face turned bright red, and she just stood there fidgeting with her hands. After a moment, Jin-Woo looked back at her. Are you coming? He asked. He checked the system message, asking for their destination. If you don't get on, I'm going back to the 80th floor. Hazel's face was still red, as she quickly stepped onto the circle. Once they arrived on the next floor, she kept her head down for a long time. Meanwhile, at Incheon International Airport, officials from the Hunters Association of Japan were in Korea to talk about the ant problem on Jeju Island. President Matsumoto from the Japanese Association and Ryuji Goto, an S-rank hunter known as Japan's strongest, walked through the bustling terminal in Korea. They were there to meet with some very important people about a serious matter. Suddenly, Matsumoto stopped and looked around cautiously. He could feel a strange mix of energies in the air. "What's going on?" he asked. Ryuji shrugged. "There's a really strong presence nearby." Matsumoto raised an eyebrow. "Stronger than you." Ryuji let out a quick laugh, clearly unimpressed. Shigeo caught that reaction, but didn't push him for answers. He knew there was no such person in Korea. Just then an employee from the Hunters Association hurried over. "I'm really sorry," he said, catching his breath. "It's chaos here today. I got held up." The man bowed deeply to apologize. President Matsumoto kept his irritation hidden behind a polite smile, not letting his frustration show. President Matsumoto looked curious. "Is everything okay? What's going on here?" "Dot." The employee shrugged. "Not much, just heard a hunter from the US is visiting. An American hunter in Korea. That's unusual. Why would they come here?" The employee leaned in, lowering his voice. "I was told it's personal business. Nothing to worry about, probably." But President Matsumoto stayed worried. Maybe he feared a dungeon break or something else serious. A hunter from the US. Interesting. "Does that have anything to do with why we're here?" Ryuji kept staring at the commotion. That must be where the American hunter was. Shigeo glanced at his watch. Even if they left for the meeting right now, they'd still be late. Matsumoto made a quick decision. "Let's go." A moment later, President Go and President Matsumoto sat face to face. Korean and Japanese officials from both organizations and government departments stood beside the two presidents. The meeting was moving fast because the topic was very serious. Then President Matsumoto suggested something unexpected. "What if we create a joint team with the best hunters from Japan and Korea?" The Korean officials looked surprised by this unusual idea. They thought this meeting was about Japan paying Korea for damages. Instead, Japan wanted to help with Korea's ant problem. What a relief. At first, everyone was surprised. Then, most of the Koreans were thrilled. Except one. President Go looked careful as he asked President Matsumoto, "Are you suggesting we team up to deal with these ants?" Matsumoto nodded. "Yes, that's right," President Go explained. "We know Japan's best hunters are tough, but attacking Jeju Island directly is too risky." He added that the ants had grown in number by hundreds since Korea's last failed attempt 2 years ago. Matsumoto smiled slyly, seeming confident about their plan. "Of course, invading enemy territory without a plan is always risky," President Matsumoto said. One of the Korean politicians who had been pleasantly surprised by the idea asked, "Do you have a solid strategy?" President Matsumoto nodded slowly. Everyone's eyes were on him as he paused for a moment before continuing. "Absolutely." He gave a signal, and his team handed out files to each of the Korean delegates. The files were packed with data and analysis they had already prepared. "This contains everything we've learned about these ants," Matsumoto explained. The Koreans began flipping through the pages as he went on. "Ants are as dangerous as high-ranking hunters. But they have one major flaw: they don't live very long." He paused for effect. "Ants only survive for about a year." The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. "If we take out the queen ant," he continued, "all the other ants on Jeju Island will die off naturally within a year." It was a bold but logical plan. The Koreans nodded as they flipped through the carefully prepared files. Killing the queen ant seemed like a more doable plan than trying to eliminate thousands of magical creatures coming from an S-rank gate. President Go's eyes were cold. He thought, what nonsense. He knew the truth. Getting rid of the queen wouldn't be any easier than killing all the worker ants. "Don't you know that the ants will give up their lives for their queen?" President Matsumoto laughed and dismissed President Go's concern. "Yeah, you have to get past their defenses to reach the queen ant," said President Go, looking confused at how calm President Matsumoto seemed. "What's he thinking?" President Matsumoto pursed his lips and asked. "But what if all the ants left the hive for a while?" The queen ant was deep inside the cave, safe in her hidden home. Has there ever been a time when every single worker ant left the queen and her eggs unprotected? President Go and the other Koreans looked unsure until President Matsumoto spoke up again. It's happened exactly 3 times. 3 times. How was that even possible? And how did Japan know this? Then, like a shock out of nowhere, came the answer. Each time Korean hunters arrived on Jeju Island, the ants left the caves to confront them all 3 times. Ugh. President Go's hands tightened into fists as he sat there. Japan watched in secret as Korean hunters faced huge dangers battling magical creatures. No one held it against Japan for staying out of the fight, but was it right to study Korea's struggles like a science experiment, and then share their findings with the people who had suffered? During the 3rd attack alone, a top S-rank hunter lost his life, and he wasn't the only one. President Go had seen the deaths happen right before his eyes. His fists were shaking with rage. Then, he hesitated. Garoji, Japan's strongest hunter, let out some of his magic energy as a silent threat to President Go. The message was clear: make one wrong move, and he'd strike back. Jin-Woo, who was at the meeting to protect President Go, quickly moved to stand next to him. Mr. President, President Go said calmly. I'm fine now. He gave Jin-Woo a reassuring nod, and the man backed away without a word. No matter what Japan's attitude was, if their research was right, this could be the chance they needed to take down those magic beasts. President Go knew he had to push his personal feelings aside and focus on what mattered most. He swallowed his anger and kept it hidden. Once things settled down, President Matsumoto finally got to the point. Our Japanese hunters will handle that, he said confidently. The plan was to split their top S-rank hunters into teams and send them to Jeju Island from different directions, surrounding it completely. The ants would swarm to fight off any invaders, leaving only the queen behind in the hive. Korea's top hunters can handle the queen, someone said. The plan was for Korea's best S-rank hunters to fly in by helicopter and take out the queen before flying back out. The room buzzed with excitement as Japan's detailed and believable strategy got everyone talking. If we follow their plan, there's a good chance we can reclaim Jeju. One person said. Another added, looks like Japan is stepping up now that they're in trouble too. This is our chance, someone else agreed. Let's work with the Japanese hunters to take back control of Jeju Island. President Go stayed quiet during the discussions. He was busy thinking through President Matsumoto's plan in his head. It just might work, he thought. After all, Japan had 21 S-rank hunters, while Korea only had 8. Only 6 could actually participate, because President Go had trouble moving around, and another person had retired. But 6 people alone couldn't distract a few thousand ants. They'd need help from the Japanese hunters to do that. The plan was to split them into 4 small strike teams of about 5 hunters each. This way they could buy enough time for the Korean hunters. The big question was, could Korea's top hunters defeat the queen? She was an S-rank dungeon boss. After all, was this even possible? Just then, Jin-Woo Sung's name popped up in President Go's mind. Imagine this, Jin-Woo, a guy who took down an A-rank dungeon boss solo, now teams up with top S-rank hunters. President Go's heart pounded like a drum. There's no time to waste the magic beast. Ants are transforming fast, and nobody knows when they'll all take to the skies. It could be 10 years from now, 5 years, or even as soon as next year. Oh no, they had to get rid of those pesky ants before that happened, even if it meant asking another country for help. But first things first, President Go didn't waste a second. What does Japan want in return? She asked. President Matsumoto gave his biggest, most reassuring smile. President Go tilted his head in confusion. Is that really all you're asking for? He said. The government officials from Korea frowned at him, clearly annoyed by his question. If that's all they want, why not just agree? Why make a big deal about it? But President Go had spent so much time in the business world that he couldn't help being suspicious. What if they changed their minds later? He thought. The officials gave him stern looks, as if blaming him for overcomplicating things. Realizing he had no other choice, President Go reluctantly backed down. The Korean team had a quick chat about the plan, and no one had any issues with it. In the end, Japan's idea was approved by everyone. After the meeting ended, President Matsumoto, with a big smile, shook hands with President Go. Our country's futures depend on this mission, he said. Let's team up and give it our all. Later that evening, back in his hotel room, President Matsumoto put a cigarette to his lips, and Ryoji lit it for him. Great job today, Goto said with a grin. You're the one who did all the work. President Matsumoto replied. No big deal. Don't be modest. President Matsumoto said, chuckling. Did you see Go's face? He was totally fuming for a second there. President Matsumoto smirked to himself as he remembered how angry President Go had looked. Thanks to Ryuji Goto, Japan's top brawler and his go-to guy, he'd managed to keep a straight face even when faced with the fury of South Korea's most powerful S-rank hunter. Ryuji snickered at the situation. As President Matsumoto had guessed earlier, Korea decided to team up with Japan. Everything was working out smoothly so far. But this is just the start. President Matsumoto said with a smile, hunters are stepping into the role of superheroes and becoming the new leaders. I'm going to create a powerful new empire with the strength Japan has been given, President Matsumoto declared. His eyes locked onto Ryuji and a small smile formed on his face. And I think you'll be the one to rule next. As the president's top aide, Ryuji was set to take over the empire after Matsumoto. This was why he admired his leader so much. He saw him as a hero. Then something suddenly popped into President Matsumoto's mind. The room was quiet except for the flicker of a cigarette burning out. Yeah, right. He snuffed it out. Any word on Korea's new S-rank hunter? The others shook their heads. No one here knows much about him either. He nodded thoughtfully. They knew just about every top hunter in Korea, but this new S-rank hunter was a total mystery. No one had any information about him at all. But here's the catch. There was one thing that could mess up his plan. Now that Matsumoto's goal was out in the open, and things were rolling, he wasn't a fan of surprises. One person shouldn't be a big deal. Except for these 5 hunters. They were the strongest of the strong, each packing as much power as an entire country's military. No wonder they're called national rank hunters. Even S-ranked hunters couldn't stand against them. One thing they all shared was that each had conquered at least one super tough dungeon like an S-rank challenge. A hunter with that kind of strength could definitely stir up some trouble for them. But honestly, the chances of that happening are super slim. With over 7 billion people in the world, the odds of this new hunter being top tier are like 1 in a billion, a crazy long shot. But if Korea had a hunter with that kind of power, they'd probably shout it from the rooftops. President Matsumoto didn't seem to have much to worry about. Still, being too cautious could mess up his whole plan. Matsumoto picked up his phone. The Japanese Association was waiting on standby, ready for his orders. Korea is fully committed, President Go said. We need to gather our strongest hunters right away. He was trying to reach out to all the Korean hunters. But there was one big problem. Jin-Woo was nowhere to be found. President Go had called an urgent meeting to explain how serious things were. But when he asked about Jin-Woo, the reply shocked him. What? He said, stunned. Hunter Sung. We can't reach him, someone admitted nervously. His phone has been off for days, and we have no idea where he is. President Go fell silent, deep in thought. He didn't like this one bit. Assemble all the hunters immediately, he ordered finally. Even though Jin-Woo wasn't there, his employee nodded and hurried off. Where could Jin-Woo be? President Go had a bad feeling about this. Earlier, Ezil had hinted that the raid difficulty had skyrocketed. And now without Jin-Woo, things felt even more uncertain. The monsters on each floor were way tougher than anything Jin-Woo had faced before. They were stronger, faster, and seemed almost impossible to beat. His intelligence was growing, but it didn't help much because his mana was dropping super fast during battles. It felt like his MP would suddenly vanish in big chunks every time he fought, leaving him struggling to keep up. That meant tons of shadow soldiers were dying, coming back to life, and repeating this cycle again and again. But Jin-Woo didn't just get lucky and make it to the 90th floor. No way, he worked hard on every single floor up to 90, training non-stop like he was shaping himself into something stronger with each step. That's how he finally reached floor 90. Jin-Woo and his shadow soldiers were battling super powerful demon clans, pushing back with all their might. Then, Jin-Woo leveled up and unlocked the 97th floor. As he fought fiercely, steam rose from his body, his sweat evaporating from the heat of his intense attacks. The battle was tougher than ever. Jin-Woo was grinning from ear to ear, savoring the sweet thrill of winning. As soon as he spotted Jin-Woo, Isiel burst out of her hiding spot and sprinted toward him. Jin-Woo clutched the permit tightly in his hand, while the castle behind him blazed in flames. First, it was the 5th-ranked Ricardo clan, and now the 4th-ranked Pathos clan. Isiel was too stunned to even react anymore. Imagine if every single intruder was as tough as him. Protecting their territory would be a lost cause. Just trying to escape or survive their attacks would feel impossible. Ezel asked anxiously, "Are other humans as strong as you?" Jin-Woo thought for a moment before casually saying, "Maybe two of them." Gun Hee-go and Hair and Cha. Jin-Woo could tell those two were way stronger than most ranks. Heen believed that other S-rank hunters like Yoon-ho Baek, Jungin Choi and Taiju Lim weren't as strong as people thought. Take Jungin for example, he's often called the ultimate hunter and owns the top guild in Korea, the Hunters Guild. But just because he runs a powerful group doesn't mean he's the strongest. If I had to compare their energy levels, I'd say Hain was a few steps ahead of Jungin. Even among S-rank hunters there are different levels of strength. Have you ever wondered why some S-rank hunters seem way stronger than others? It's probably because once they get really powerful, it gets super hard to tell just how strong they are. Jin-Woo couldn't help but smile as he thought about this. He wondered, would his feelings about these hunters change once he got out of there? And then there was President Go. Would Jin-Woo feel the same way about his power, now that he had changed his mind about President Baek after meeting him a second time? It makes you curious how things might look different later on. Jin-Woo couldn't help but get pumped thinking about how much stronger he was going to become. But first things first, he still had to finish clearing the demon's castle. Only 4 floors stood between him and victory, and he could practically taste success. He turned to Ezel with a grin. "You can head back now." Ezel's ears drooped at the mention of 2 more super strong humans like Jin-Woo. But her head snapped up at his words. "What?" she asked. Confusion etched on her face. "I've got this from here," Jin-Woo said firmly. Ezel had been a huge help in tracking down those noble castles. But now he didn't need her anymore. Time for him to take the reins and finish what he started. Jin-Woo's heightened senses probably played a big role, but archdemon nobles were so powerful that he could pinpoint their locations without any trouble. He didn't need her help anymore, since her only job was to guide him. Bringing her along now would just be extra baggage. Jin-Woo broke the news to her gently. Then, "I'm useless to you now." Ezel's face turned pale, and she looked like she'd been punched in the gut. Her dramatic reaction was priceless. Jin-Woo struggled not to burst out. Laughing, her over-the-top expressions never failed to surprise him. Belle's eyes went wide as Jin-Woo stood right in front of her. "Is this the end for me too?" Her heart pounded bad. Dump. Each beat felt as loud as thunder. Belle watched nervously as Jin-Woo slowly raised his hand. As he reached out, she squeezed her eyes shut, bracing herself. But then, instead of what she feared, Jin-Woo gently placed his hand on her shoulder. Ezel's eyes fluttered open, and she felt the warmth of his touch. Jin-Woo was right there, super close. He smiled like he'd been waiting just for her to look at him. "You did a good job," he said with a grin. "Thanks." With that, Jin-Woo turned and walked toward the teleportation circle. Up suddenly. Words popped up in front of him. "Floors 1 through 96 have been opened." "Apeen, where would you like to teleport?" "Apeen." Jin-Woo glanced back at Ezel. Her face was a mix of surprise and disappointment. Fear, worry, surprise, disappointment. These smart monsters showed all kinds of emotions. But were they real creatures from another world, or just tricks the system made? Jin-Woo wasn't sure yet, but he was determined to find out. If he kept gathering clues, maybe one day he'd uncover the truth about where this whole thing came from. Ezel paused for a moment, then called out to Jin-Woo.